Hello and welcome to this video on for loop statements in Java. In this video, we'll be seeing about how to write our own for loop and few examples to understand them better. So let us dive into the topic. So basically a for loop contains four parts. Initialization. It is the initial condition which is executed once when a loop starts. Here when we initialize a variable or use an already initialized variable, it's an optional condition. So the next is the condition. It is the second condition which is executed each time to test the condition of the for loop. It continues execution until the condition is false. It must return a boolean value either true or false, and it is also an optional condition. The last is increment or decrement. The increment or decrement value varies, and this part is also an optional condition. The last is the statement. The statement of the loop is executed each time until the second condition becomes false. So to understand them better, we are going to assume that you have watched the do while and while loop video. If you haven't, watch that video and get back to for loop. So the syntax for loop is for, and you will have three conditions that needs to be done. The first is initialization. In this particular example, we need to print the values from 1 to 10, right? So my initial condition would be, I will initialize a variable I and associate with the value 1 since our loop starts from 1. And next, I less than or equal to 10. So my finishing condition is 10. So the second part of the for loop contains the condition. So this would return whether it is true or false. Until the statement becomes false, the loop will continue. And my last condition is the increment part. My increment part depends upon problem, and here we need to increment it by 1 because we are printing the values from 1 to 10. So for example, if my values should range as odd numbers, I would write it as I equal to I plus 2. This is because every time the loop occurs, my I value increases by 2. So 1, 3, 5, 7, 9. So that happens. So in this case, our increment value will be just I plus plus. Once my initialization and my condition checking and my increment is done, now comes the statement part. So the statement part in this problem is completely dependent upon the value I. So I just print the value of I. So let us now run the program. As you can see, the value from 1 to 10 is printed using for loop. So now using for loop, we can also design numbers from 10 to 1. So how do I do that? I do that by converting my initializing value to 10. So the question now changes from 1 to 10 to 10 to 1. And my ending condition would end with 1. So the thing you have to notice is the condition checking needs to be inversed, meaning the I value should be always greater than 1 and our value should be compared every time. So 10 greater than or equal to 1 is true. So now you need to decrement the value of I so that it reaches 1. So how do we do that? We convert our I plus plus into I minus minus. By now doing that, when I try to run the same program, we get the values in reverse. As you can see, the values are now reversed. So by tweaking anything in this particular three conditions, we can provide infinite number of possible outputs. So now we'll be seeing about nested for loops. So for loops have this capacity to have an inner and an outer for loop. So having a for loop inside a for loop provides a various useful applications. For example, star formations, for you to calculate both rows and columns, print rows and columns. So let us try how to do that. So first I'll have my outer for loop. I'll initialize a variable I and associate it with 0. Maybe I've tried to print 9 different values. So I less than or equal to 3 and I plus plus. So my outer for loop is done. Now getting into my inner for loop. For my inner for loop, I would be required to use another variable j and initiate it to the value 0. Now I try j less than or equal to 3 and j plus plus. As you can see, now I have a nested for statement done. Now I'll just try to print the values of I and j and see what happens. I plus j. Now this is a functioning code. As you can see, all possible numbers in the permutation combination, we are getting the value 0, 0, 0, 1, 0, 2, 0, 3. Let us understand why that happens. So the first loop starts with our outer for loop, and we take the initializing condition first. So the first initializing condition, int I is equal to 0, is stored, and now we get into the inner for loop. Now the j value is also 0, and we do not check the condition or we do not see the increment, we just print it out. So 0, 0 is our first loop. So what happens, our inner for loop isn't over yet. So the value of j increases and the condition is checked, 1 less than or equal to 3. That's true. So we get inside the loop again. So 0, 1. Again the value of j increases, 0, 2, 0, 3. When the value of j becomes 4, this condition fails and we get out of this innermost for loop. But we still have another loop to check, right? So now in the second for loop, we see that the value of I increases by 1. So the now value of I moves from 0 to 1, and 1 is less than or equal to 3. So this condition is true. So we again get inside the inner for loop. The twist here is that the value of j again becomes 0 because we are starting fresh with our inner for loop. So j becomes 0, 1, 2, 3, but this time our I value is 1. So that's why we are getting the values I equal to 1 and j moves from 0, 1, 2, 3. So this happens until both values reach the maximum of 3 and 3 and we come out of this loop. So this can provide some applications in our programming. We'll see some of the examples where this can be useful now. So here is an example problem to understand nested for loops. So here we need to print the output of these stars in this particular fashion. So as you can see, the number of rows and number of columns are equal, and when you try to loop the rows, the row number defines the number of stars in each column. So using nested for loop, I would be able to print this out much quicker than manually typing. So how do I do that? I write int I equal to 0. So these stars are not dependent upon these values initial conditions, meaning I can write either I equal to 0 and I less than or equal to 4, less than 4, I plus plus. This works. At the same time, I can just increase the value 1 and 5. So this is gonna loop me through 4 loops, right? So it is gonna work anyway. So just to avoid confusions, we're gonna stick with the classic, starting the value with 0 and ending with 4. So now getting into the for loop, inner for loop, initialize the value j and I assign its value to 0. The change here is that it would not be less than 4, but it would be less than the value of I. In my 0th column, the value of I is 0, increases to 1, 2, 3, right? So this would set my maximum limit for my inner for loop to stop printing the star. So I'll just less than or equal to I and j plus plus. So now I'll have my system dot out dot print ln. I would not have ln because my inner for loop shouldn't leave that particular line. So I would have my star and a space just for visually appealing. And outside of my inner for loop, I would just type system.out.println and leave it empty because I do not want anything to be written, but I want to go to the next line. So now when I try to run this program, as you can see, the output is printed. Now I can be just flexible, like increase the number of rows. So this way the value of rows changes. Instead of 4 by 4 triangle, I get a 5 by 5 triangle. So this is the power of nested for loop.